Much, Mr. Chairman. I might say that Mr. Kelley and Mr. Baker and Mr. Holden, I don't think any local responder has ever been called upon to do what you have been able to do. And from Arlington to New York City, all of us in America are proud of all of you. Mr. Baker, you said this was the greatest structural collapse in the history of the world, and Mr. Holden, that makes your cleanup the biggest cleanup that has been able to be done based on this structural collapse. Mr. Baker, I understand there were some conclusions to the civil engineer's report. Could you talk to a little bit about that, about some of the weaknesses that you found in the structure of the World Trade Center?
Well, this initial report was really more of a question of a reconnaissance report than it was trying to find findings. It was a very, very complicated site with a lot happening. We were trying to get this document released, the World Trade Center Performance Study, which is a FEMA document available to you. And what we were trying to do is we were trying to pull the information together that was available and somewhat package it so that it would be available for future researchers and try to prioritize. And that was mainly the emphasis. We put together a few likely scenarios for some of the collapses, but we made no conclusions as to what they were. A lot of our questions, certainly there were a lot of discussions about the nature of the collapses of the Twin Towers. As a structural engineer, I have to say that most structural engineers were surprised at the collapse after it had survived the airplane impact. But in retrospect, maybe we should have known better. But one of the things that surprised us quite a bit was the collapse of Building 7, which was it didn't get a lot of press, but it was a 47-story building, 2 million square feet, a big building. And it was the first building that had ever collapsed, ever, that had been a fireproof steel building that collapsed in an uncontrolled fire. So it was the first time. So that building, it was not hit by an airplane, so the collapse of that building is a very important one, and that's one that's, the study's ongoing, and NIST is studying it. There were two likely scenarios presented. One was diesel fuel, there's a lot of emergency generators in that building. Some people give that credibility, we don't know. The other was perhaps just a simple paper storage fire. It turns out one of the best sources of fuel there is paper, okay? And it could have just been something as simple as a file room that burned for 7 hours. But those are the things. It really wasn't a question of nailing the thing. I think it's probably take a couple of years before we really know why some of these buildings actually collapsed.
From the audience, I heard a phrase, what about fireproofing? I guess it was based on code, right?
Well, yeah, there's issues, questions about the fireproofing and the buildings. Building 7, I'm not aware of any issues, and that's certainly part of the NIST study. There were some questions about the fireproofing in the towers. There had been efforts to increase the thickness of some of the fireproofing in the towers, and whether or not why that was done, and it was not complete at the time of the impact. The Tower 2, which was the second one hit, the first one collapsed, was hit in a zone where the fireproofing had not been upgraded. The question there, it's an unknown thing if that was really significant or not. It's quite likely that that particular structure would not have survived regardless, because there's a theory that's kind of post this report is that even though the fires that were burning there weren't in the sense of building fires all that large, there was a lot of fireproofing that was knocked off. Okay, so there was a lot of exposed steel.
What was that? A lot of what now?
A lot of fireproofing that was knocked off, but by the impact of the airplane. When you think about this, these airplanes were going extremely fast. They were going cruising speeds down that low. It was, I think, close to around 550, 600 miles an hour, if I remember correctly, going very, very quickly. So there's a lot of debris ripping off a lot of fireproofing, and then the ensuing fire.
Mr. Kelley, what was your biggest challenge at the Pentagon?
Our challenges were actually manyfold. Excuse me. First was perimeter scene security. Here you have the nation's defense. You have a hole in the building. You have rescuers and responders responding in to assist and aid both civilian, fire, police, and gaining control of those folks and making sure that we had accountability for those people. Getting logistics to the scene and getting the materials that we needed to the scene. Though it wasn't a huge problem, it was at first because the federal government had let out because there was a terrorist attack. And so now this log jammed all the highways and byways that we needed in order to get materials in until we got control and got all those people gone and then could start getting in the resources that we needed. Those were probably the two biggest things in a large scope. As far as the fire service is concerned, the attack inside the Pentagon, it's a very big building. You have 982-foot corridors. We wear 45-minute, 30-minute air packs. And we had to do some very creative air management with our air packs, where we'd actually stay off air, crawl down hallways as long as we could, go on air, try and fight some fire. And remember how long it took us to get in and how long we had so that we had air to get back out so that we wouldn't lose anybody. Another challenge was each of the evacuations on the first day while we were actively engaged in firefighting. The first evacuation was the structural collapse on the heliport side of the building, dropping the hose lines, losing ground that we had gained in fighting the fire to evacuate out, those hose lines being burned up, equipment we had left behind, having to reamass that equipment and go back at it again. Those were all challenges to us on that first day in order to get the fire under control.
That's amazing. Hearing your testimony, all of you, reminds me of a line from Admiral Nimitz after the Battle of Iwo Jima that where uncommon valor was a common virtue. And it sounds like it to me. Mr. Holden, I'd like for you to shift a little gear here and talk to me about the psychological impact of you and your wonderful people and crew working for so long on such a massive project, dealing with such tragedy. Has the city put together any kind of a program to help the psychological readjustment of those workers that work so hard at Ground Zero, or what do you see about that?
Actually, I believe FEMA's put together a program that is open to all New Yorkers, as well as the people who, both the construction workers and engineers who are down at Ground Zero. There's, I believe it's Project COPE and the Liberty Project, which are these broad-based counseling services. There is, I've talked to all my people and still meet with them quite regularly, and a lot of people have taken advantage of these FEMA-sponsored programs, and they've told me that the people are really quite competent and quite helpful, and it's been a big help, actually.
Seems like to me that that's part of the terror of terrorism. It's not just the people who die in the incident, but the impact, the washover, the psychological impact on the entire country and on those people who were nearest the flame, so to speak. In many ways, just like combat, they live with that experience forever. Mr. Kelley, you want to talk to us a little bit about some of your workers and that psychological impact on you?
Yes. In our department and in Arlington County government, they embrace a very strong employee assistance program. And at Ground Zero, at the Pentagon, from the very moment after the attack, we actually had EAP workers with the collapse rescue teams and the firefighters right there on the scene 24 hours a day for all 10 days that we were there. Even if it was just to go get somebody an apple or to bring a cell phone to them to speak to their spouse or their family while they were still working, to take some of the stress and pressure away. It was very important. As far as wellness for the community and to make Arlington whole again and the region whole, once again, we got a grant, and they started a program called Community Resilience, where they went physically door to door. They learned this from Oklahoma City, and where they had clinicians that went door to door throughout the residents and the business community, first in the Pentagon region, Crystal City area, but then expanded out through Arlington and into the schools to help the community deal with stress and to deal with the things that they find after an attack like this. And there's a website that folks can go to get pointers and to get tips, and it's www.communityresilience.com. And it's got very good information for any community.
As a firefighter, and you and your firefighters, when you go in to talk to kids and to children, they've been powerfully impacted. They don't have a lot of the defenses that adults have. Maybe sometimes that's good, but can you tell us a little bit about the impact on some of the kids in the schools, and what are you telling the kids?
Well, it's the impact is twofold. The impact is to our own children that are scared when their parents go to the police officers and firefighters go to work now Daddy or Mommy, are you sure you're going to come home? And so to reassure them and to get them well. And then in the schools, the best way that we deal with the kids, and we got wonderful drawings and we got wonderful sentiments from the kids, and you could really see their feelings in what you were talking about in their artwork and in what they were saying, which we use as an inspiration. We have these things in all our fire stations, hung all over the place. We brought them down to the scene and put them right up on the side of the Pentagon as folks would send these things to us to keep the rescue workers going. But we say to the kids, we're still here. That yes, some horrible things have happened, and this is a tragic event, but we're still here. We're going to be safe. We were there, and we're standing here now talking to you. We need to move on. That's kind of how we're handling it, but at a more elementary level.
Mr. Holden, you've got a whole city, a whole big community to deal with. For you and some of your workers, I'm sure you get called upon by the schools to go out and talk about the experience. What are you telling the kids? Can you share it with us a little bit?
Actually, I haven't given a lot of talks to kids. I've given talks to university students and engineering students, primarily about the engineering project. But insofar as disaster response, I actually have not given a whole lot of talks to, if any, to elementary or junior high school kids.
Mr. Baker, you've looked at this report. What's the one conclusion that you would draw and you'd give to this commission or to your fellow structural engineers around America about what you've learned?
Well, this sounds trivial, but you cannot allow large airplanes to fly into buildings.
I'm sorry again, sir?
You cannot allow large airplanes to fly into buildings. You cannot design against it, okay? There are small airplanes like that tragedy down in Tampa where the kid flew the little airplane. That's not going to hurt a building. But if you have a large commercial aircraft, passenger or cargo, I don't care why it's there. If those large airplanes, you cannot design against it. And if you look at the 767, that's a big airplane. There are bigger airplanes out there, quite a bit bigger. There's the 747s. There's the A380 Airbus, which is on the boards in Europe, much larger airplane. So, they're absolutely, both cargo and passenger airplanes have to have foolproof safety systems.
Mr. Chairman, some of the other commissioners might have some questions.
Yes, they do. Commissioner Roma.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I remember 9/11 as if it was yesterday as a member of Congress and a member of the Intelligence Committee and as somebody who was right across the river from the Pentagon, Mr. Kelley. And after a full day of scrambling around trying to get into a new skiff and trying to get access to intelligence and figure out what was happening to the country and how we should react and making sure the legislative branch was moving forward and getting the right briefings, I felt just like many Americans and wanted to contribute somehow. Everybody had seen what had happened in New York all day. So at about 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock at night, I drove across the river and was able to get through the barricades and right to the front, about 500 yards from the Pentagon. And I sloshed through ankle-deep water to get over there to see if there was anything I could do, or at least to see it, so that I could see what these terrorists had done to our country. And I was mesmerized looking at this huge fortress, this structure that looked like a steel boot had come down on the top of it and just made a paper accordion out of it. And you were there. You had fire trucks, ladders going up both sides of the building that was still on fire at that time of night. Your folks were scrambling everywhere to see what they could do to help others. And I'll never forget, and I tell my 4 kids about this, turning around from that sight of horror and terror and seeing all of you as an army of America lined up to heal America and take them forward. And you guys did it and accomplished so much. And I think it's the story of courage and bravery that so many of us are proud of and inspire us to work hard and try to get to the bottom of what happened and try to make the country a better place in the future as well. So I want to personally thank you and everybody in the fire department of Arlington and Alexandria and the rescue crews, and if you can take that back to them, this commission very much appreciates what you helped us with. And New York, Mr. Holden, I can't say I was fortunate enough to come up to New York City. I can say that I'll never forget it, coming up a couple days afterwards as a member of the Intelligence Committee and going to Ground Zero, and I went on a boat up the Hudson River because it was too difficult to get through the town. And a sergeant of the police department was taking us up, driving the boat. And I asked Tony what he was doing on that day and how he felt New York was reacting to it. And after telling me about all the people that were literally jumping off into the water to try to get away from the collapsing buildings, and he'd ferry them over to New Jersey for triage, I asked him again, how does New York feel they're doing now? And this grizzled veteran of probably all kinds of things that he'd seen and heard in New York looked at me. He was probably 55 or 60, he had huge tears flowing down his cheeks. And he said, we feel like we can never do enough to help each other. Well, you did. And you came forward and did extraordinary work in record time to clean things up and to move people forward and try to heal the process. I wish Commissioners Scopetta and Kelley were here so that we could thank them. I hope you'll pass that on our behalf, and I hope you will make sure that we get an opportunity to talk with them at a later date. Along those lines, Mr. Baker, I want to ask you, based upon your expertise and your insight on this, it's quite a compliment to pick somebody of your skill for this kind of endeavor, to look at the trade towers in particular and see what happened. So I want to ask you specifically, given this counsel that you bring, this insight that you bring to this report, you said you were pleasantly surprised by the integrity and the structure of some of the other buildings. Were you concerned or disturbed at all by any of the features, the design and the structural engineering of the Twin Towers when you studied them?
It took a long time to come to grips with the collapse, just almost
When you did come to grips with
Yeah.
it, what did you conclude?
Well, I'm not sure that I think that the building performed remarkably well, actually. I think it's, when you never wanted to collapse, but one of the things you might say about it, it was a very strong building. It took a huge amount of damage.
Mm-hmm.
There was so many columns were knocked out. We counted the ones in the perimeter. A large number of columns were knocked out initially. Later studies, ongoing studies, have indicated there were a large number of core columns were knocked out, and the building still did not come down immediately. And so the nature of the structure was enough that it could hold itself together long enough for people to get out. A lot of people did get out, and approximately, I believe, 99%, I believe, of the people who were below the impact zones were able to get out, according to articles in the New York Times and USA Today.
I just have a couple questions, and then I want to make sure other commissioners have an opportunity to ask questions as well. Apart from a plane, obviously not hitting these buildings and bringing them down, let me ask you specifically about the structure of the buildings or the uniqueness of them apart from a plane hitting them. Do you know of any other high-rise or super high-rise buildings that have floors composed of open web trusses spanning up to 60 feet?
No, I do not.
Is that something that would concern you?
Yeah, it's something to be looked at very closely. We were not able to look at it that closely in this situation. And what you're referring to is these are commonly called bar joists. Okay, you see them like in the roofs and the ceilings of like big box retail, like a Walmart or it's a very lightweight truss. And there is things the industry needs to do to study these things further.
So that could be of concern, and that disturbed you, that...
It is something that we don't have the answer on, and I personally would not ever use them. in this type of building.
So you will recommend that other high-rise buildings not include that?
Until we know more about it. In fact, there's a draft out for the New York City Building Code, which has recommended a temporary moratorium on the use of these types of trusses in high-rise buildings until it's better understood how they can be fireproofed and the integrity of the fireproofing. The issue comes down that they're very small bars, and they're about 1 inch diameter, and it's somewhat whether or not you can adequately fireproof those.
Specifically, I know Senator Cleland asked a general question about fireproofing. Let me ask you a more specific one. Was 1/2 inch of thickness of fireproofing on the floor trusses sufficient to give a 3-hour fire rating, in your view?
I doubt that a 3-hour fire rating was required for the floor trusses, just as a point of reference.
I didn't ask that.
Okay, but no, I would be very surprised if a 1/2 inch gave a 3-hour. We did not study that specifically, but I'd be very surprised.
Okay. And finally, did you see or hear of any evidence in the course of your inquiry that the fireproofing at the Twin Towers was inadequate? Obviously, you just said you had a concern, but any others?
There were, we do know there was an ongoing program to replace fireproofing in the towers, that the Port Authority, as the floors were re-tenantized and made available, that they were going back in there and putting additional fireproofing onto the floor trusses. There had been some issues of some of the fireproofing falling off of some of the core columns in the elevator shafts, and there had been some earlier lawsuits. We were not able to get access to that information, though, to know the details.
And you tried to get access to it?
Yeah, we had no authority. It was all locked up in legal, there was non-disclosure agreements on lawsuits and the like. We couldn't get to the information.
Thank you, Mr. Baker.
Commissioner Lim?
Yes,
And Commissioner Baker.
first I'd like to associate myself with the earlier comments of great admiration. I think that you and your colleagues made the whole country very proud and impressed the world with the way the response was immediate, was engaged every asset available in the cities and the districts available, and everyone on the sites showed courageous disregard for their own personal safety, not to mention the Trial Lawyers Association, which the mayor alluded to earlier on. So please take the questions that I'm going to ask in the spirit that they're intended, which is to get onto the record as much of the lessons learned as possible so that we can make appropriate recommendations for the future. This is not intended to try to point fingers at anyone or so forth. But there have been a lot of questions raised since then about why, after it was clear, and this was perhaps a measure of weeks rather than days, that there could be no more survivors from the wreckage. Why was the site not made a crime zone and given the proper protections so that evidence and forensic investigations could be taken place? Why wasn't that done?
I believe that security around this site, and the police department, in fact, did call it a crime zone, and it was very difficult to get access to the site as the police department and the National Guard and Army were called in to provide security to prevent people who need not be at the site, were kept away from the site. As you mentioned, we believe that there were, in fact, survivors for many weeks early on. So our main goal was basically to remove particularly the heavy steel beams to allow the fire department and police department to continue with their searching operations, with their rescue operations.
You mentioned the steel. There have been other questions raised about why the steel was removed to a site and then ordered destroyed without being made available to the overall investigation of the structural clues that would have helped in really evaluating where failures took place and whether codes were met. Why and how was the decision made to destroy that steel?
Again, you have to go back 19 months and put yourself in the position of trying to find survivors. So our priority at that time in September and October was still looking for survivors. The steel was precluding that from happening because much of the debris early on was being sent to the Fresh Kills landfill. It became clear after 3 or 4 days that the equipment that the Department of Sanitation had to handle the city's garbage was not equipped to be able to pick up those large pieces of steel. And those large pieces of steel were preventing the rescue workers from crawling into crevices and voids underground. We really had no place to put it. There's no place to put 170, 180,000 tons of structural steel. We were pressed by the urgency of trying to find survivors. We looked at a number of operations. We knew that some of this steel might have asbestos-containing materials on it, so we knew that we couldn't just dispose of it. But it was not an option to continue sending it to the Fresh Kills landfill where all the debris was being taken. The only option, based on discussions with both internally with our engineers as well as with New York State, with the state of New Jersey and with the Environmental Protection Agency, was to basically ship it off to New Jersey and recycle it. No one was volunteering to just store that huge volume of steel. They would only take it if they could melt it and recycle it.
I see.
We really couldn't figure out any other option at the time.
And this was a sort of a crisis management group decision. It wasn't any one person that dictated it.
This was my decision.
Okay. I've read that the Twin Towers, because they were owned by the Port Authority, were actually exempt or outside of the enforcement codes for the city of New York. Is that true, or?
Not a Port Authority employee, but the buildings are in fact Port Authority, and I am almost certain that they are exempt from following New York City building code requirements.
Isn't that something that we ought to address, or that should be remedied? I mean, why should a building like that in the middle of the city of New York be exempt from state and city codes?
I think that warrants looking at.
Mr. Baker, I'd like to ask you, did the buildings conform at the time of their construction to prevailing standards of survivability and structural integrity that were prevailing at the time of their construction?
That was not, in the short period of time that we did it and we produced this report, that was not studied in detail. My understanding that NIST at this point has actually, is trying to commission a study to do a detailed review of the prevailing codes, particularly the New York City Building Code, vis-a-vis the construction documents. So that was not done as part of this study.
Yeah, that we look forward to receiving that when that is done, or if we can be of any assistance to see that it is completed before the end of our report, that would be very helpful. Mr. Baker, how was the decision made, or what were the obstacles made to keep you from the site for so long while so much of the evidence was being removed? And I don't mean evidence in terms of liability and so forth, but evidence in terms of learning the lessons. I'm not sure I know all the details, but basically,
we were told that the folks on site did not necessarily want other extraneous people walking around. They had their hands full at the moment. I personally was on the site much earlier than that because as part of this other activity, as part of this, assisting the search and rescue and the other. But the rest of the team was not able to get access because of the nature of the activities. For the October 6th, when we actually did get access, I believe we were deemed to be superfluous at that point.
Was it, perhaps, Mr. Holden, you might shed a little light on it. Was it because they were deemed to be superfluous, or was, by this time, had the fear of litigation begun, that the mayor spoke to yesterday, begin to enter the calculations of city officials?
Took a lot of months to go by before I started thinking about litigation, quite frankly. I'm not sure exactly about when the American Society of Civil Engineers came on. I know we worked with SIONI, which Mr. Baker alluded to earlier, which is a state organization of structural engineers, who worked with numerous city structural engineers, as well as structural engineers we had hired to both examine buildings and look at the site. The problem, again, going back 18, 19 months ago, was that you had a very difficult site to control. As you alluded to earlier, it was a crime scene, so access was limited. We also, especially that first week or two, had thousands of volunteers coming down to the site, which was a wonderful and much appreciated outpouring of spirit. However, it was an extremely unsafe site, and we were very concerned that having hundreds and thousands of people walking around the site could cause further fatalities. And if the mayor gave us one clear marching order, it was that no one else was to die at that site. So I'm not exactly certain, when the American Society of Civil Engineers was looking to gain access, but early on, some of the constraints were, in fact, the fact that it was a crime scene and just safety concerns. We were trying to grapple with just what was there and how many people we could allow on site and how stable the various piles were, I'm sure you remember the facades of Towers 1 and 2. We were not certain how stable those facades were, and we were very concerned about having so many people walk around the site. However, I would never use the word that Mr. Baker used, calling the engineers superfluous. I mean, they were extremely helpful. But those are just some of the general difficulties in allowing people on the site.
Thank you for your responses. They're very helpful.
Commissioner Benveniste.
I have a question for Mr. Holden. Following up on my friend and colleague Max Cleland, who is quite interested in the effects of terrorism and the lingering trauma of those who have experienced it firsthand. My alma mater, Stuyvesant High School, is located 4 blocks north of the World Trade Center. On September 11, 2001, they were evacuated from the school. The evacuation notice was run for your lives. Hundreds and hundreds of teenagers from all parts of the city made their way on their own out of the toxic plume, watching as people jumped to their deaths from these buildings. An extraordinary traumatic experience. Can you comment on what the city has done with respect to trying to provide guidance, counseling, follow-up for the children who were directly exposed to this tragedy?
I wish I could, but I'm really not qualified. Those questions are really much better addressed either to the Commissioner of the Department of Mental Health and Health or it's now the Department of Education. But the Department of Design and Construction really was limited in its focus to demolition of the existing structures and debris removal. So I'm just not qualified to speak to your question.
Commissioner Garlick.
This is for Shawn Kelley. A number of us on this panel have served at various times at the Pentagon, and we are aware that the cafe in the middle of the Pentagon is called Ground Zero.
Not anymore. They
It
changed
was.
that. Yeah, yes.
And so we knew that we were working in a place that was a possible target. We heard testimony yesterday that the evacuation procedures at the Pentagon were not understood, at least, and not well practiced, and could not be followed by the people in the building. And so my question for you is, did you conclude, or did your after-action report conclude that there were any failures in the evacuation process at the Pentagon after the plane slammed into it?
We have emergency incidents at the Pentagon every day. We run an average of 2 responses a day at the Pentagon. I personally investigated a fire there 2 weeks prior, a 2-alarm fire. So it's 11% of our call volume is to federal facilities within Arlington. We have never experienced in the past a problem in evacuating the occupants from different sections or parts of that building out and away from where the danger is, along with the assistance of the Defense Protective Service, the police officers that work in and out every day around that building. In this particular event, or in this particular incident, to have this plane and almost the entire plane made it into the first floor of this building, and to penetrate in 3 rings, and I'm not going to go into the floor plan of the Pentagon, but to penetrate in 3 rings and then pop out into what they call A&E Drive. I will say that most all the fire doors did work in the outer corridors. That's good and bad. The fire doors closed like they should, but then it was dark and it held smoke and could have possibly caused further injury or death to some of the folks. They'd also just done construction and updated the Pentagon and installed some new windows which were not openable. And so that also had some impact on the building not being able to breathe or let out its products. With regard to where the Pentagon is now, I can share with you that they have installed some enhancements to assist in easier evacuation. In fact, in my opinion, it's state of the art now. It's an example for the rest of the nation to follow. Though be it some of those things can't be shared, it is truly an example now. The employees do practice evacuation drills. The Pentagon has even approached my office, the fire marshal's office, to have 2 deputy fire marshals assigned down there, kind of like a third party, to ensure that proper code enforcement is conducted. Not that it isn't now, but just to have a third party assessment and to assist in things like evacuation plans and drills and things like that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. A little, if I may, the after-action report, if you don't mind, you did mention it. It is available for free to anyone, and I'm not trying to make it an ad, but it's real important in the fire service that we study ourselves and we learn from our actions and have other persons learn, good or bad, and if there's criticisms, then folks need to fix them so that if things didn't go so well, that they're prepared or do better before.
That's an excellent grace
and-
note
and-
on which to end this hearing, I think.
I've got one question before we end. I'd like to ask Mr. Holden, perhaps Mr. Baker, Mr. Holden first. When you got to the site, who was in charge?
I would say the fire department and the police department.
Jointly in charge?
Yes, I mean, the fire department was clearly putting out fires and the police department was handling security.
3 or 4 hours later, who was in charge?
I would say the same.
Same people. Same people. Did that change then, later?
I don't think that really changed until, and again, now I'm kind of just giving you my impressions. I don't think that really changed until several days later when the National Guard, I think Governor Pataki brought in the National Guard, and then it appeared that the National Guard and I believe some Army units were down helping with security. Although it was certainly the fire department was playing the major focus on the interior.
Okay, and Mr. Baker, when you got on site, who was in charge then?
My impressions when I was there is that the people in charge overall charge was the fire department of the sectors, but the operational control was the contractors. And these contractors were very, very good. They're used to managing very large projects, you know, and they have command structures within their groups, and they know how to bring in heavy equipment. They know how to deal with subcontractors and all this kind of stuff. So a lot of the operational, who goes there, we want to see if that building's going to collapse, let's go into this thing and look around. It was really our interface was with the general contractors, and they did an excellent job.